England Patriots came out with their all-decade team for the 2010s, and we're here to talk about it all, reactions, snubs, the whole bit. I'm Sierra Goodwill, here with Mike Petraglia, Evan Lazar, and Taylor Kyles. Mike, you actually helped vote on this all-decades team, so let's start with you. Do you think it went according to plan?
Pretty much. I mean, I tweeted this out that I was very privileged to be a part of the 27-member committee panel that voted on this. And secondly, when you go to 5 Super Bowls in a decade and you win 3 of them, pretty much most of the team is self-explanatory. But there were a few discussions that really required a lot of thought, and it had to do about the Patriots' style of offense, certainly throughout the decade, and their defensive front looks throughout the decade. So that presented some challenges, very unique challenges, I thought. But for the most part, I thought most of them were slam dunks.
How about you, Evan?
I think that most of the part we got it right. I think the little kind of gripes that you could have with it are just splitting hairs. But the big one I would look at is on the offensive line, having Sebastian Vollmer over Marcus Cannon. Cannon, I think, a little bit more durable in his time here. I think Vollmer at his peak is probably the better player overall, but Cannon a little bit more durable, 3-time Super Bowl champion versus 1 ring in the decade. It just felt like maybe Cannon gets a little bit slighted here. Along with Cannon, I would say the only other thing I had an issue with is not finding a spot for LeGarrette Blount at the running back position. Just what he meant to this team in the postseason, I think, is the biggest thing. The games against the Colts, the multiple touchdown games that he had in big moments late in the season when the weather got cold and we really got to Patriot-type football. They seemed to really lean on LeGarrette Blount in those years, but it's hard to argue having James White on the list at running back. I think that was more of a ballot issue with just not having a spot for both Blount and White than it was having one or over the other.
That was the biggest issue for us. As a matter of fact, Evan, that we had to decide how to handle James White. Was he a flex kind of player or was he a pure running back? And like you've noted before, having him score arguably the biggest touchdown or one of the biggest touchdowns in Patriots history as a running back on the ground, I mean, it would be hard to not look at him as anything other but a running back. But certainly I loved, and I was a big proponent of having LeGarrette Blount on this team simply because of what he meant in the postseason.
Your immediate reactions, Taylor?
Yeah, and I think that, like you guys said, I think the formatting was really the biggest issue for me. I felt like there just wasn't enough room for a lot of good players. Obviously, Blunt's a big one. And then on defense, considering how many odd fronts they run in 5-man lines with 3 defensive tackles, I thought it would have been nice to have one more slot in there. Alan Branch is someone I thought maybe kind of deserved to be on that list. Him and Lawrence Guy, I thought it was a bit of a toss-up. And then in the secondary, considering how much nickel and how many sub-package defenses, especially the Patriots have played this decade, I thought it would have been nice to have one more defensive back, maybe slide someone like Jerron Harmon in there, as clutch as he's been and as instrumental as he was for the new dynasty and over the past decade. So really it was just, I thought there weren't quite enough spots for a lot of really good players that were instrumental. But again, you really can't argue too much with the guys on there. They're all fantastic.
Yeah, I think the argument is definitely people who've been left off, not people undeserving who made the list. Let's focus in on defensively, though. I put out a poll on Patriots CLNS Twitter about biggest snubs that people thought were left off the all-decade list. And you mentioned 2 of them, Evan, and LeGarrette Blount and Marcus Cannon. But some people also brought up Jamie Collins. Do you guys think he should have been considered?
I think that Jamie Collins is one of the most overrated players of the decade. I got to be honest with you. I think that listen, a lot of what he does is really flashy and really impressive. The athleticism, super impressive. But they're just guys that this is an all-decade team for the Patriots and for the organization. And you have to represent what it is to be a Patriot, the Patriot type of way of playing football. And freelancing and going about things your own kind of way was never really in the playbook for Bill Belichick. So as much as I think Collins is a great individual talent, in terms of what these players did, like a Mayo or a Hightower, those guys playing the system the way that it was meant to be played and delivering Patriot-type moments too. I think Collins is another one of those guys also that kind of faded late in seasons often. You know, the Denver AFC Championship game is one that always stands out with Owen Daniels smoking him down the seam for no reason. Or last year, you know, he starts out like an all-pro bat out of hell and then he kind of Taylor's off at the end there as well. So I think that those guys, Mayo and Hightower, especially Hightower, the big moments and the playoff moments that they had really puts them well above Jamie Collins to me.
Yeah, I agree. I originally had Jamie Collins as an outside linebacker in my prediction this morning, but it was only because I forgot about Trey Flowers, which I knew was going to happen, and then I kind of had to move some stuff around. But I agree, Evan. I think Collins didn't really represent what you think of when you think of a Patriots linebacker. You think of discipline, you think of leadership, you think of someone who's a leader in that locker room. And Jamie was well-liked, and obviously he was a flashy player, very exciting, made a bunch of plays. But when you think of those categories, he really doesn't fit in. So I don't really think there was much room for him on the list, considering how many guys do fit that mold of being leaders who really do their job, as we love to say, and also made a bunch of championship plays. And when you think of Jamie Collins, you really don't think of the Super Bowls the way you do when you think of someone like Hightower and you think of someone like Trey Flowers with the big strip sacks that they've had. So I like Jamie Collins, but I'd agree. I don't think there was quite room for him on this list.
And I thought Jamie Collins really benefited from two players, obviously Dante Hightower and Kyle Van Noy. When defenses had to concern themselves about where they were on a particular play, or offenses had to be concerned about accounting for where they were on a particular play, I thought Jamie Collins would take advantage of those situations. And when he did take advantage, that's when he would make big plays. But there were other plays as well. One that comes to mind was in the regular season against the Buffalo Bills, his first time around, when he got gashed for a huge running play around the end. Patriots, I believe, won the game, but it was kind of symbolic of, playing himself so aggressively that he was out of position and hurt the rest of the defense. Look, I'm not here to kill Jamie Collins. He's a terrific player. He's obviously an impact player, but an all-decade performer, I didn't have him there.
Trex, can I ask you one question? Did Revis get any sort of conversation at the table?
The name was brought up out of respect, but clearly one season, and given the fact that this is really about the whole decade, no. Yeah. I mean, there was no way we could put him on there because of the 1 year. You could also kind of make the argument for Aqib Talib in that regard. Certainly he's another deserving candidate on this team. But again, he played, I believe it was 19 games in a Patriots uniform over the course of a year and a little bit more. Aqib Talib's another one. But I like the idea, guys, that you brought up of a slot corner. That's maybe something that maybe we can revisit down the road.
Yeah, the reason why I asked the question is if you add a third corner, is it Talib? Is it Revis? I've seen some Logan Ryan love out there as well. I think that Talib, though, is a great one to bring up because I remember how that secondary flipped a switch the second they made that trade. They were really a disaster from that 2010, 2011 year to all the way up until they make that trade for Talib. And remember the game I was at, it was against Andrew Luck and the Colts, and he had a pick six in his very first game in Foxborough. And just the way that the whole defense kind of fell into place after he got here, he was a guy that's very underrated, I think, in this decade in New England. And Revis obviously had his moment too. So I don't know if he's necessarily underrated, but I'm just curious if he was even a part of the discussion. Obviously, Gilmore and Butler, you can't argue with either one of those guys.
Let's shift our attention to the offense for a little bit, because the three wide receivers that made the list, and Danny Amendola, Julian Edelman, and Wes Welker, three undersized slot receivers. Is that not quintessential Patriots football?
Yeah, I was thinking, I actually tweeted out earlier that how many dynasties can you think of where the top three receivers are under 5'11" and they all primarily play in the slot? That's crazy. And, that's where you put Tom Brady at the top of that list because, that's the offense that he's run. Obviously, Rob Gronkowski was their big guy. It's not like he was only throwing to diminutive receivers. But it shows you how important all three of those guys were in a very similar role and how they kind of occupied it over a different time span. So that was one of the big things that jumped out to me was, wow, like we talk about the Patriots and slot receivers, but no, seriously, they were the straws that stirred the drink. So that was pretty wild.
It was great to see Wes Welker make the team. I think that there's been a lot of pushback for Wes Welker in terms of his importance to the Patriots dynasty. No Super Bowls, obviously being the big one, and the drop in 2011 and all that kind of stuff. But when you look at the stats, Trax, you and I were talking about this earlier. When you look at his run from 2007 to 2012, but just from 2010 to 2012 in this decade or this past decade, the numbers are just off the charts. And I really don't think that you get Edelman and Amendola with without Welker coming here
Right.
first. He was really the augmentation of all of everything that happens in the slot. And then the response on the defensive side of the ball, there's no nickel corners. There's no slot cornerback role if it isn't for Wes Welker kind of spearheading that sort of movement. So I'm glad that he gets his recognition, because a lot of fans, I think, have soured on his career because of the way that it ended and the fact that there was no Super Bowl ring.
Well, when you talk about Wes Welker, I'm also in that same committee meeting. We are talking about nominating the final 3 finalists for the Patriots Hall of Fame class of 2020. And my nomination was Wes Welker. And that was because he really, as you said, revolutionized the position, something Ernie Adams confirmed in the meeting with us as well, that like you said it perfectly, Evan. Without Wes Welker, there is no Julian Edelman or Danny Amendola. That position really was born of the work that Wes Welker did. And obviously there are the people who would say, well, without Randy Moss, there's no Wes Welker, right? But certainly Wes Welker was able to get open, work his way in the slot, and develop the relationship with Tom Brady. And he's certainly deserving of not only being on the 2000 all-decade team, but also this one as well.
And I think people forget about Welker's production as well. I mean, everyone talks about Edelman, and physically, I think Edelman is a superior player. But, I mean, when you talk about production, and obviously injuries factor in, but it speaks more to how Wes was so consistent. And his production, and compared to Julian Edelman's, it really doesn't hold a candle. Wes was consistently getting 100 catches, 1,000-yard seasons, and Edelman's obviously missed time, and that's played a factor. But that chemistry, it was different with Brady and Wes. And I think over time, it's easier to see, Edelman and just kind of figure that it's very similar. It's the same thing, but it really wasn't. I think there was something there that was special. And although Brady was able to kind of continue it to a degree with Edelman, with Amendola, Wes Welker was a different animal. And time is really, I think, obviously it's good that he's on the list. Didn't hurt too badly, but I think it's great to see him get the credit he deserves.
Absolutely. And for all of our Patriots coverage, you can check it out on our website at clnsmedia.com and check out all our videos on our YouTube channel at Patriots Press Pass.